feel comfortable. Our guest speakers have come a long way to be with us tonight, so we do want to keep on schedule. On behalf of the Stop the Pipeline Bolton Committee, I'd like to welcome everybody here tonight. My name is Elizabeth Calcaney. I live here in Bolton, and Nancy Case and Vincent Kennedy and I have been working the last few weeks to organize this meeting for landowners and abutters who may be influenced by this pipeline, the Northeast Direct Project by Tennessee Gas and Kinder Morgan. I'd like to spend just a couple of minutes walking us through what's happened since April, when many of us received a letter from Kinder Morgan, and take you right through August 28th, when our selectmen passed a resolution against the pipeline. And our goal for tonight is for, in particular, landowners and abutters to learn everything they want to and can with our guest speakers here tonight about this project, what it is, what it means to you personally, what it means to the community, the state and beyond, and learn what actions we can take as community members to work to stop the pipeline. That's the perspective we come from. So these letters came to us in Bolton and across the state in late April. We received a letter from husband and I. Actually, we were called by Kinder Morgan before the letter arrived, and they asked to come and survey our property. And the answer was no, we really don't want you to survey our property. But we also wanted to know, well, why do we need the pipeline? What's it for? And we spent a lot of time asking those questions and found other like-minded people in the community who were also asking those questions. And informally, a group of us formed this committee. We didn't really even call it a committee initially. It was just a group of concerned citizens. And then working with Don Lowe, the Bolton Town Administrator, the town organized an informational meeting on June 26th. Hopefully many of you were able to attend that, where the Kinder Morgan representatives came and gave their story, made their case for why this pipeline is important. Our committee gained more steam, worked with legislators, and Don Lowe, on behalf of Bolton, did a lot of work with our local legislators as well. And our selectmen on August 28th passed a resolution, a very eloquent resolution, that made the case not only from the local perspective of landowners and the community of Bolton, but the state and really the planet made strong arguments for why this was not a good idea. So we wanted to make sure that we reached out to everyone who's in that group of landowners, abutters, and concerned citizens, both in Bolton and neighboring communities, to learn more about this. And tonight we're lucky to have two guest speakers, Rosemary Russell, the co-founder of No Frack Gas, and Katie Eisman, also the co-founder of No Frack Gas, and the director and legal liaison of Massachusetts Pipeline Awareness Network on Mass Plan. So the next slide shows that today's agenda is really just to welcome you and make brief introductory comments that I've just made. We will turn it to Rose, who will make a presentation. And you'll learn a lot in this presentation about the pipeline, what it is, what it isn't, whether there's a case to be made for its need, and what we as citizens can do to act. We'll have some time for question and answers, and then we'll wrap up. And please, for those of you who are interested, we would encourage you to sign on the list at either one of the tables for contact information. And if you'd like to join the committee and get more involved, we'd like to know who you are and how to reach you, so we can make sure that we involve you in whatever community actions we lay out. And we have big plans. We can make a difference. So with that, I'd like to close my introductory comments and welcome Rosemary to the podium. We just need a quick 30 seconds to change the presentations. And Rose will be with you shortly. It wasn't even 30 seconds, was it? It was very close. You never predict how to do it. Hi, everybody. Excellent turnout. This is fantastic. I'm Rose Wessel from No Frack Gas in Mass. And we actually started as a website in February. And it started when I found out a Kinder Morgan, there we go. I found a Kinder Morgan memo on Facebook, believe it or not. It had been in a blog, and somebody had picked it up and forwarded it on. And it was the first time I heard about it, and I saw this large stripe up through the northern part of Massachusetts. And I basically said, I'm planning on fighting this, who's with me? And information started to pour in. And a lot of the information was from people who had received those calls or letters or
had somebody knock on their door and give them just basic scant information. There wasn't a lot of information out there. A lot of them were saying that's what they were talking about when they saw the map. And it started coming in, so we turned it into a website because it was getting hard to manage all of that. And months later, it's turned into a large statewide movement to stop this pipeline. So I know that you're dealing with the lateral through your town. I'm going to talk a little bit first about the entire Northeast Energy Direct project so you understand the overall. The Northeast Energy Direct project actually consists of 2 pipelines. Originally, the plan was to start in Wright, New York, where there's a large gas hub of different pipelines already existing, and it would follow existing pipelines down through New York and into Richmond, Mass, where there are currently 3 pipelines coming in. And there we break off into what they call greenfields territory. And this is all new construction through areas that don't have pipelines yet. And you can see where it connects with, they're planning to connect it with the Fitchburg lateral, which is already existing from the south. And this is where your Worcester lateral would come in. And it continues on to Dracut, where there's another large gas hub. There's several pipelines that join there. And one that becomes key in understanding this puzzle is this blue line that goes up into Maine. That's the Maritimes and Northeast pipeline. And that's what this is designed to connect with. Now, originally in New York, the gas was coming out of Pennsylvania through another planned pipeline from another company. Williams and Cabot had planned the Constitution pipeline. And that was the red line here that was supposed to run up through upstate New York to Wright. And that one met with a fierce amount of opposition. And people denied them property to survey for that. Only about 23% of the people along the line denied them the right to survey. But that got turned back by FERC when they filed, and they said you need to go get more information. You don't have enough to build this pipeline for it to be permitted with this information. So as soon as that was stalled, Kinder Morgan proposed another pipeline of their own. That's the blue line that would start again in Pennsylvania along existing lines on their 300 system and connect up to the 200 system. Runs basically in the same area. So that entire thing, plus the laterals, is now called the Northeast Expansion. So this is just a small part of a very, very large project that spans 4 states. The transmission line itself is slated to be either 30 or 36 inches. They haven't decided yet, but it's a large, high-pressure natural gas transmission line. And it's primarily gas that would be obtained in the fracking fields in Pennsylvania. And if you're not familiar with fracking, that's a method of drilling where they drill all the way down, excuse me, about a mile into the ground and around a mile out in other directions under the ground. And there are many chemicals that are used in that. There's up to 750 chemicals that are used to break the rock apart and to extract the gas and oil out of the shale. Because it covers 4 states, it's a federal project, and it falls under the purview of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. That is the sole permitting agency for pipeline projects like this. And because of that, it means that local and state regulations can be overridden by FERC. It would leave a permanent 50-foot wide right-of-way clear all the way across the state. Along the lateral, it's likely to dip down to 30, but they prefer 50. The capacity of the main transmission line would be 2.2 billion cubic feet a day, and that becomes important later on. It's much larger than any need that was called for by the state. And the pressure that would be maintained along the transmission line is 1,460 pounds per square inch, which is extremely high pressure compared to previous pipelines. The newer ones are containing higher and higher pressure as a way of packing more gas into the line and using the line as storage. Points of concern along the transmission line are compressor stations. These are large barn-sized facilities. Right now there are ones planned in Wright and Dracut on either end of that first line, more recent maps have shown one somewhere on the border of Conway and Ashfield, about midway the state. In order to maintain that pressure, they will have to build more. They're usually every 40 to 60 miles. And when pressed, they will say, yeah, we will need more, but we don't know where they are yet because they're in the early planning stages. So more of them will come up. They're not likely to come up along the lateral line. They can take many acres. They have lights on 20, all night. They make noise 24/7. Usual range at 500 to 600 feet is about 50 to 90 decibels, constant, all the time. It's very loud. OSHA, just so you know, OSHA safety standards kick out around 88 decibels. And the real concern for the larger area around these is that they blow down. They let off pressure by exhausting raw natural gas into the atmosphere when they need to change pressure or regulate the pressure. And that lets all the chemical residues from the drilling out into the atmosphere. It's letting methane into the atmosphere, which is a very strong greenhouse gas, actually much stronger than carbon and CO2. Another type of facility that's an area of concern are pigging facilities. When I first saw that there was a pigging facility planned, I thought, oh, it's going through a farm? I didn't understand. But a pig is actually a gauge that runs through a pipeline. It's like a big squeegee. And they have a couple of kinds. One actually pushes all the residues out that build up along the pipeline. And where the facilities are, that's where the pipe comes out of the ground. And there's an end of pipe that they shut off from the main valve. They let the pressure out in that chamber. And again, that's venting raw gas into the atmosphere. And then they put the pig in, repressurize it, and let it go for 40, 50 miles to the next compressor station. And then on the other end, it goes into a receiver. It's, again, a piece of pipe that comes out of the ground. They close off the main valve. They let go of the gas on the other end as well. And there it's pushing out residues and other condensates that have built up in the pipeline, as well as the gas that comes out with it. This is actually a smart pig. Those are designed to test the condition of the metal in the pipe, look for cracks and so on. This one looks like it's a dual purpose. It has both the squeegee elements that would clean out the pipe and the smart meters in there. And valve stations. This is something that you will definitely be dealing with on the lateral. There are valve stations in urban areas, they're placed every 2.5 miles apart. In rural areas, they're every 10 to 12 miles. But this is what shuts down automatically when there's an accident or a rupture. Basically, if the pipe registers a drop in pressure, these will shut off automatically. It's also the place where they would go to shut down for maintaining. But what needs to happen again when they go in to do work or when there's a depressurization is they off-gas through these vents. So again, that's another place where they will off-gas along the pipeline. For the lateral itself, it's slated to be 12-inch. It's actually 12 3/4 inches. 12 inches is a nominal measurement. It's a branch off of the Fitchburg lateral. And it's basically to serve northern Worcester. And some folks have asked why are they not coming up from, the 267 line or off of the Clinton lateral that's already up there. And part of the problem is the Clinton pipe is too small, and they say there's too much population along that area. So even though it's serving Worcester, Worcester is too congested, according to Kinder Morgan, for them to drop a pipeline through there. The pressure on this line would be 750 pounds per square inch. Release valves would be along the way as necessary. It depends on how many houses there are and how many businesses are in an area, how close those valves are going to be. Again, the less dense it is, the further apart they are. The pipe would mostly be buried at 36 inches deep. That's federal limit at that point, except where there's ledge. They said they can go as shallow as 24 inches if they hit ledge. And does anyone know what the frost level is in Massachusetts? 4 feet minimum. 6 feet if you're in a higher territory too. So this is well within the frost plain, and we'll see why that's a problem in just a few moments. They do propose going 60 inches under farmland, road crossings, and small stream crossings. Large bodies of water, they would drill lateral drills similar to what they use in fracking to go underneath. Like the Connecticut River, for instance, they plan to go 50 feet underneath and across the Connecticut River that way. The permanent easement, because it's a 12-inch pipe, it can be a little bit smaller than for the transmission line. They like to keep it at 50 feet wide, permanent easement, but they can go as narrow as 30. But during construction, they want 75 to 80 feet that will be cleared. They'll let it grow back to 30 or 50 depending on the area, but they will clear 75 to 80 feet during construction. And there will be wider areas where they need to stage their equipment and park vehicles and so on. That tends to be up to 110 feet. They said they try to pick areas for that aren't already treed. If it's a 50-foot easement, they can build as close as 25 feet from homes. I looked this up to double check it, and FERC indeed does not have any rules on how close a pipeline can come to a building. So from an engineering standpoint, they need to, they can go as close as half the easement. They need that easement space to get their equipment through, but that's the only limit. And they say they will not take a home for this project. There are some places in the state where it's a little bit in question, especially in Richmond where there are already 3 pipes. There's one spot where there's the choice of either taking out a house that's registered on the National Registry of Historic Places or somebody's well. And there's no other place for another well. So she's asking, will you take my home? And they say they can't. So if you're in a pinch, that's not an option. So they will only take easements. And once it's built, they can then add on to it as well. They can add extra valve stations or picking facilities, compressor stations, or they could do what they're doing out in the western part of the state and the southern part of the state, where you get multiple pipelines running alongside each other. Right now in Sandusfield, they're adding an extra loop of 4 miles, for instance, to 2 other pipelines that are already there, and that pushes the easements even wider. Yeah, the expansion treatment is impossible. They say that they have a lot of trouble co-locating with roads. Some people had suggested, why don't you go along I-495 or 190, I had the wrong number. They said it's mostly because of safety restrictions and not enough space on the side of the road for them to expand an easement. Another reason that they did admit to once it was brought up is if they're building in a rural area or a less populated area, they can use thinner pipe. There are different classes of pipeline thickness, and they can use class 1 through rural areas. Through here, it's probably be a mix of class 1 and class 2, depending how dense the population is in any given area. And it's still categorized a transmission line. A lateral is still part of the transmission system. It's not part of the distribution system. And Kinder Morgan has been saying in their presentations that any gas that comes into Massachusetts needs to be odorized. You know that smell if you have natural gas, they have you do the scratch and sniff test. That's not natural to natural gas. That gets added so that people can detect it, because otherwise it's odorless and you don't know when there's a leak. Transmission lines generally do not have that odor added. It's an expensive process, and they tend to only do it on distribution lines. They've been saying that any gas coming into Mass needs to have it added. We haven't found any proof that that's a law in Massachusetts. I've recently written to several state departments to find out the validity of that, because that would raise at least some concerns if that was definitely true. It's also part of the larger proposal. Your lateral line is part of the Northeast Energy Direct program. So if this whole pipeline project gets canceled, your lateral gets canceled as well. They did say at the Berlin meeting that they could refile just for this lateral if they wanted to at another time in order to get gas from the existing pipelines to Worcester. So stopping the Northeast Energy Direct Pipeline is a big part of it because that's their immediate plan. They could come back with another plan even if it's defeated. Yeah, the pipeline hazards, I mentioned class 1 pipeline through the rural areas. That makes them very prone to ruptures and explosions, especially when they run at very high pressure. And what happens in a pipeline fire when it explodes, you can't put that out. They have to let it burn out between the valve stations. And it's actually in their instructions for local emergency crews. Rule number 1 is contact the pipeline company. I'm not sure where they would come from here. Out in the western part of the state, they would come from either Agawam, Mass, or Nassau, New York. So their locations are fairly far apart. I'm sure there must be one further out east, but I don't know exactly where. But there are only 2 or 3 along the entire length of the pipeline. Secure the area, evacuate as necessary, stay upwind. Do not attempt to put out fire or operate valves. Attempt medical assistance if it's safe to do so. And establish a command center for when the pipeline company arrives. This is what they tell local emergency crews to do. And this is what a 20-inch line fire looks like. That's why they don't want anyone getting close to it to try and put it out. This was a lucky one. Nobody was actually hurt. It was in a fairly remote area, and anyone who was nearby, whose home was obliterated, happened to be gone at the time. So they took out half an interstate and melted the other half. And you see who's responding. It's the highway department and a lone local policeman. They're the first ones on the scene. And one of the things that people don't understand is these events, although you don't hear about them much, they're fairly common. There have been over 990 since 2000. There have been 34 fatalities, 137 injuries, 1.5 billion in property damage. That's more than 1 a week of explosions, ruptures, major leaks. They're not all a big pipeline explosion, but they are significant incidents that cause a certain level of monetary damage. That's how they're rated. And usually there's personal injury in there as well. This is from the Pipeline Safety and Hazardous Materials Administration. This is the DOT's own figures on this. And it's something that is on the rise. It's been climbing steadily for the last 10 to 15 years. A lot of it is due to lack of regulatory oversight and not enough people to inspect and more lax rules that they have to follow. And a lot of times they will say, well, accidents happen when it's a third-party involvement, meaning somebody didn't call, dig safe to find out if it was okay. But just this year, there were 2 that happened because of frost heaves and ice. This one in Minnesota was from frost heaves, and that's where that 3-foot rule comes into play. 3 feet is not deep enough to avoid frost damage. And in Pennsylvania, it was ice buildup. And again, that one was, I think, 30 inches. This is what a 12-inch pipeline rupture looks like. I thought I'd put that in there so you get an idea of scale of what something the size of this ladder would be like. The chemicals that are used in hydraulic fracturing, for a long time the stance was that that's at the drilling site. That's where those chemicals come out. The National Institutes of Health did a study earlier this year where they tested transmission line gas, and they found that over 60 known carcinogens, neurotoxins, and endocrine disruptors do come all the way through the transmission lines and into the distribution lines. So they do travel. And also, there were air tests at compressor stations in Texas that showed pretty much the same roster of about 60 carcinogens, neurotoxins, and endocrine disruptors. And a lot of people say, well, it's just a little bit of a release at these different facilities. But Small doses of these chemicals can cause long-term exposure hazards. That's the trouble with carcinogens. A small exposure over years can still cause cancer. The four most common that are found are benzene, toluene, ethylbenzene, and xylene. And they cause a whole range of health problems, from anemia to nerve damage, hearing loss from nerve damage, Parkinson's-like symptoms from nerve damage, as well as cancer and kidney damage. Landowner issues. I chose this one from Pennsylvania, where you see that they can indeed build very close to homes. And that was the case when Penny Morgan came to speak in Berlin too. They said that it would be half the easement space is the only thing they need to adhere to. They try, of course, to stay a little further away, but there are lots of places where they just can't. We've looked up the damage to property value. Nationwide, the forensic appraisal group found that it was 20 to 30%. We talked to some towns in Western Mass that said it was around 10% decrease of property value. An Neshoba area realtor said he's had 2 properties at least fall into the unsellable category just on the news of the pipeline coming through. The deals just fell through instantly. And it's a one-time payment on the easement. A lot of people think, oh, great, they'll be paying me rent basically to come through, but it is a one-time payment. And you have to balance what that offer is against how much of a decrease in the value of your home are you looking at. Will you be able to sell it later on down the road? It looks like a lot of money sometimes, but when you weigh it against the other expenses, it can turn out to be not such a great deal. Of course, you don't have to accept their initial offer. Another misconception is whatever they offer you, you either have to take or they'll take it by eminent domain. You can negotiate with them for whatever you think is a fair price, and you're actually better off holding out for eminent domain. Because if you go ahead and make a deal with them, you still carry liability on that piece of land, you're still paying taxes on that piece of land. And if they take it by eminent domain, you're absolved of that. So you don't have to worry about that anymore. And chances are you can negotiate for a higher price at that point. That easement space, you cannot put trees, pools, ponds, sheds, any permanent structures on there. Once it's constructed, it stays in open easement all the time. And if they get their certificate of public convenience and necessity, they can use eminent domain. Again, the advice that we've seen all say, let them bring it to eminent domain. You actually end up with more rights at that point, if it comes to that point. We're trying to not let it get to that point. You have the right to deny them access to survey. Even if you've already granted access to survey, you can rescind permission. On our website, nofrackedgasinmass.org, we have letters that you can print out and fill out and send directly to the company. Some are for rescinding permission, some are for denying permission. It's a good idea if you're somebody who's nearby the pipeline, but not necessarily somebody whose land would be impacted. You can still file a deny survey. And one of the reasons is something I was just told about earlier. This pipeline map has already changed. Apparently this part of it is now swung over this way. So if the properties that are now impacted had filled out a deny permission to survey, it would already be in place beforehand. They're still deciding where these properties are going to go, where the pipeline is going to go, and which properties will be impacted. So it's okay to preemptively do so. Yeah, each individual property can be negotiated separately. You're the one who owns the property. So you have a right to dictate whatever terms you think are fair if it gets to that point. The company does encourage landowners to get a lawyer to help with easement negotiation, but they won't compensate for any legal fees. So again, holding up for eminent domain is the place to put your energy. It's the most efficient way to go about it. Some responses to this pipeline proposal have included rerouting. issues of, well, this isn't such a good space, let's try to move it over here. People want to move it away from conservation lands, understandably. Ecologically sensitive areas like wetlands, waterways, or places where habitat would be segmented, or away from agriculturally sensitive lands, and areas where there's concern for public safety. The trouble with all of these is it's just moving this beast around. All those problems will follow it no matter where it goes, so it's just moving on to other people. What we at No Frack Gas and Mass have been advocating very heavily is opposing any new pipelines. And some folks say, well, the gas is needed. We'll get into whether or not more gas is actually needed. Regulator study shows that with current efficiency programs that are already in place, we don't need more pipeline. That's actually a study that was conducted by the New England States Committee on Electricity, otherwise known as NESCO. And we're living in that low demand scenario where our efficiency programs are #1 in the nation. And their study showed that they don't need more pipeline. Pipeline capacity constraint is only for a few hours a day, a few days a year in the coldest parts of the winter. A lot of people have been talking about the polar vortex and how cold it got and how much demand there was on the gas system, but they actually didn't use up all of their capacity. The pipelines are running at capacity, but it didn't stop the electric generators that use natural gas from producing enough electricity to meet their needs and sell more electricity to New York State on top of it, even during the polar vortex cold snaps. So it's a little bit overblown. Peak demand, if it really needs to be addressed, could be met by reducing demand through increased efficiency programs. They could also look at LNG storage. Just 1 or 2 facilities would take care of all the state's needs as defined by NESCO. We could also use that Maritimes and Northeast pipeline as storage. That pipeline was originally built to bring gas down from Nova Scotia, where it was being extracted, down to Draper. And that shale field has gone dry, and they have discontinued it. So that pipeline is staying empty. That could be used as a storage facility that's already built. And then there are other options. There's clean energy storage, battery systems for solar and wind, flywheel technology that stores kinetic energy when it's producing too much, and then it unwinds and generates energy when they need extra. Adding more gas to our energy mix also delays the development of more clean energy. It's basically stalling our push for clean energy for another 20, 30 years or so, because we'll have this gas to answer any needs that might come up. Our electric generation portfolio, which is why this pipeline was originally called for, it's already cleaner than gas output. Our portfolio, the average source of electricity in Massachusetts generates 910 pounds of CO2 per megawatt hour. An average natural gas plant is 1,210. So adding more natural gas to our electric generation takes us away from our greenhouse gas goals that are mandated by the state. And with well over half of our electricity already coming from gas, adding more to the mix would add to our susceptibility to market volatility. If there's a spike in gas prices, we feel it now. If we are adding more gas to the system, we're going to feel it just as much. And the original call for pipeline capacity from NESCO was for 0.6 billion cubic feet a day. Kinder Morgan is proposing 2.2 billion cubic feet a day. That's nearly 4 times as much. Where do you think the gas is going at that point? Sorry, import. That should be export, yes. Sorry. That's a bad typo. But yeah, it would go overseas. And when Kinder Morgan is asked, will you let gas go overseas? They say, yeah, we can't control it. We're a common carrier pipeline. So they can't control who their customers are. If you're building a pipeline that's that much larger than any stated need, you're inviting it. And once gas hits foreign markets pay between 2 and 5 times as much for gas as we do. There's an effect called netback, the prices overseas start to drag up the prices at home. So there goes the cheap energy argument. This is an ISO New England chart. ISO New England is kind of, think of them as the air traffic controllers of the energy grid. When there's a drop in one place, they say, okay, we'll take energy from there, supply that area. They did a study of what the actual needs would be. First of all, if we discontinued our efficiency programs in 2012, the demand for energy automatically goes up. And then they projected out to 2015. That's how long the current programs are supposed to last. If they abandoned them, it would go steadily up. But then there was a low demand scenario where they said, what if we continued our energy efficiency programs as they are? And you can see it stays almost flat, even dips a little bit. So if we continue on with the energy efficiency programs that we already have, electricity demand stays flat. So it's not like there will be a large increase in the amount of gas needed for electric generation. And here's the peak demand. It's, as I said, it's only a few days a year, usually in the morning and the afternoon, when there's a peak demand on pipeline capacity. That's when everyone's waking up, heating up their homes, cooking their breakfast, or coming home from work, heating up their homes, cooking their dinner. Then the gas that goes to home heating starts to compete with the gas that's used for electric generation. And there hasn't been a shortage of home heating gas because they get first dibs. Those customers have long-term contracts, and they get first dibs on the gas. So it's mainly the electric generation grid that feels a little bit of a pinch for a few hours a day, a few days a year. Adding more gas to the energy mix will delay clean energy solutions. It also will, delaying clean energy solutions also has an impact on how many jobs are created. By the end of this year, there will be 88,000 jobs in solar in Massachusetts alone. That's with programs that are already in place. If we put the investment that would go into the pipeline into clean energy solutions, and we have mandates in the state that we do need to meet, by 2020, they're supposed to have 1,600 megawatts of solar and 2,000 megawatts of wind. If that goes to those jobs, they produce, for every $1 million spent, 12 new local permanent jobs. So if you take the $2 billion that was the original price tag of the pipeline, it's up to $4 billion now. If you take that $2 billion, that's 24,000 jobs. TGP, the pipeline is supposed to produce 3,000 during peak construction only. So that's like a year and a half, 3,000 temporary jobs, as opposed to the 24,000 long-term jobs in the state. Oh, this is talking about the more susceptible to price volatility. The power industry buys gas on the spot market. And that's one of the things that they don't like about the peak constraints, is the price does go up. But if we're exporting our gas, the cost of gas is probably going up anyway. So this isn't going to solve anything. And also, if we build a pipeline, we pay a fortune for the pipeline, and then we keep paying for fuel. If we put that money into solar and wind, the fuel is free after that, after those investments in infrastructure. This is one of the problems with relying on gas as well, is the drilling. The actual wells only last a few years. Within 5 years, a well has produced over half of what it will ever produce, and then they cave. So the way that they keep feeding this gas boom is by just continually drilling more and more. And it's actually to the point where people are investing in wells that are currently going, but it's actually fueling the next generation of wells already. They crash that quickly. So with that happening, with the sweet spots of the Marcellus Shale already tapped out as they are, again, that's another reason why gas is probably going up in the next few years. Bruce Wynn from Berkshire Environmental Action Team is one of the researchers who's helped us with this. And he had a pop-up ad come up while he was doing his research. It said, would you like to invest in natural gas? So, why not? He clicked on it and said, what field do you want to invest in? He said, Marcellus Shale. And the report came back, said, even though projections for Marcellus Shale say it's a 100-year supply, it's actually closer to 10. You really shouldn't invest in this. And this is where this gas is mostly supposed to come from, is from the Marcellus Shale. This is FERC's slide of export terminal applications. And you'll notice up here in Nova Scotia, there's at least 2 of them as of February of this year. So all of these are export terminals that are applying. And the Maritimes and Northeast pipeline, that's sitting mostly empty in Maine right now, the owner has filed for a permit to switch direction. So instead of bringing gas down from Nova Scotia to Massachusetts, it would go from Draycote, Mass. Up to Nova Scotia. And just in the last couple of months, there's been increasing news of Canadian ports that are set for export licenses. Goldboro is one of them that's directly connected to the Maritimes and Northeast pipeline. There's no other place for that gas to come from. Canaport, I think, I don't know if that one's connected to Goldboro. There's another one that's directly connected to Goldboro. And this is from energy company sources, news. And this is Kinder Morgan's own slide of the Northeast Energy Direct project. And it's a pretty clear visual of where they think gas will be going. It comes out of the Marcellus Shale, comes across the state, and yeah, some of it goes down to feed New England markets, but then there's also that part of the puzzle. So for them to say, sometimes they say, well, export is pure speculation. This is in their memo from last year. Public opposition has been growing steadily for months now. We have now 32 towns out of 32 that have voted on a resolution against it have passed. Every single one of them has passed. Some towns have even passed 2. One had one for community rights, and one had one against the pipeline. And another one just had the Open Space Committee pass a separate resolution from the rest of the town. So you folks are not alone in passing a resolution in your town against the pipeline. Oh, we also have over 12,200 signatures on the statewide petition, and it's still growing. When we had our rally at the end of July in Boston, we brought a petition to the governor that had 10,300 signatures on it. It's 5 inches thick, and we've been collecting more ever since. It just continues to grow. We have support from political parties. The Green Rainbow Party says that we need to go in the opposite direction. This is state legislators. There are actually more of them. These are the ones I could glean that have officially opposed the pipeline. And the Western delegation put out a statement speaking against the pipeline, saying that they've come to the conclusion that while it would provide good jobs and good local labor, the project on the whole is not in the public interest, and we can and should do better. Representative Jim McGovern has been speaking very clearly against the pipeline since the beginning of this, and continues to. He actually just had a meeting with folks from FERC to ask them lots of pertinent questions about how they reached their decisions. So he's investigating it very thoroughly. Martha Coakley issued a statement, her campaign issued a statement saying that she does not support the pipeline, mostly for environmental reasons, but also to strike the right balance of affordable energy. Senator Markey has opposed the pipeline. He said it does not respect the rights and wishes of local residents. It's far too massive for Massachusetts' energy needs and would worsen climate change. And Elizabeth Warren issued a statement. She also put a very long op-ed into the Berkshire Eagle newspaper, which was picked up by AP and sent nationwide, basically reiterating that this is too large of a project. We're sinking, before we sink our money into gas infrastructure, we have an obligation, wherever possible, to focus our investments on clean energy technology. And earlier, at the end of July, we met with the Patrick administration. We met with Paul Patrick and the Secretary of Energy and Environmental Affairs. And during that meeting, he agreed that yes, we need a new study that actually evaluates the low demand scenario. And we need one that looks at alternatives as well. And we've been working with the Department of Energy in developing the scope of that study. And they're about to take that on. And he also delayed the tariff. There was originally going to be a tariff that would pay back all of the electric generation companies for their investment in the pipeline. And that would be charged to all New England electric ratepayers. So everyone's electric bill would go up to help Kinder Morgan gain contracts with the power generation companies. That is currently stalled. It's not going to be voted on until at least the end of this month. It might be stalled indefinitely. We're not sure exactly what the future of it is, but it might be going away. And that's due to public pressure. There are many land trusts and conservation groups that have issued statements against it. All of that has added into influencing the politicians' different statements on this. And there are many groups, it's not just our group, that's working on this. There's lots of local groups as well as Stop the Pipeline here in town. And these are our websites where you can get more information. I'm all set.
Rose, thank you so much. We have time for questions and answers, and what I'd like is Katie going to come up also, or? Yeah. Why don't you both come up? And why don't we let Katie have the podium for a minute and just say a few words. And then if people could simply raise their hand, I will help sort of select. And if you could make sure that you don't go on too long with the comment part before you get to the question, just so that everyone who has a question is able to ask it. So Katie, please.
Hi, I just want to briefly tell you about Master Plan. We are a coalition of organizations and groups. I've been working with Rose since February, and then I started Master Plan, and we pulled together lead organizers from various land trusts and organizations, form an executive committee so that there can be statewide coordination of the anti-pipeline movement. And I've been in communication with the lawyer working for the Stop the Pipeline group in New York against the Constitution pipeline that Rose mentioned. And we've been talking to the politicians Rose mentioned and trying to work at that level. And No Frack Gas has been focusing on that, as well as answering questions from landowners and helping with resolutions and on the more town level. So we're trying to work at all levels. But let's just open it up to questions so we can get as many as we can.
Yes.
I have one question. You brought this to my attention. In the financial news, there was an article that there was a glut of natural gas from the Marcellus Shale in the Northeast, and the dividends that shareholders were going to get was going down, and they were lamenting the losses that they would ensue as a result of the glut in the Northeast. So I was wondering if you had any information on that.
Well, can you hear me without the mic? The question is about the prices of there being a glut of gas and that affecting shareholders with the price of gas going down. And my main response is that really what we're facing here is this huge supply, which is pushing all of the development. It's not demand, as Rose explained, it's really the supply, which is why we're looking at export, which the investors might say, well, export will help drive the prices back up. So that's good for the investors, but not for the consumers.
Yeah, it wasn't the price that was going down, it was the amount of money dividends that shareholders were getting that was going down. The price was going up actually to consumers.
And that price going up to consumers is because it's starting to go to export, and in foreign markets, like Europe, for instance, pays between 2 to 4 times as much for gas that we do. Asia pays 3 to 5 times as much. I think South America is also in the 3 to 5 times as much category. So that net back from those more expensive markets is starting to drive consumer prices up. But yes, there is a glut. And one of the things that FERC looks at, they say they look at when they decide whether or not to approve projects, is there a need? Well, they define need as, is there a market for it? As opposed to, is there a demand? Do people need it to stay warm to make sure the lights turn on? And that's part of the problem that's going on. It's also going on in the oil industry. That's why there are so many trains now carrying oil across the country. And it's Bakken shale, which is really up.
Yeah, I was just saying the glut in energy is happening in the oil industry as well. And the Bakken shale, for instance, is producing tremendous amounts. They're just drilling like mad, and there's this glut of energy going through. That's why there's so many more trains, and they're adapting them fast enough. They're not retrofitting them properly, and they're blowing up. That's another byproduct of having a glut and not necessarily a market for them. And this is really the same kind of condition.
I guess I have 2 questions on several topics.
Yeah.
The first one is based partly on
If
previous.
you could stand up and speak loudly.
All right, this is based partly on previous experience dealing with National Grid. I'm just wondering, these various statements and remarks that are attributed to Kinder Morgan, is there any believability? Are they somehow backed up legally or by anyone who at least asserts that they speak for the company? Or are these just remarks that are made by someone who happens to show up at a meeting somewhere?
The meetings that the statements that I've been making are based on their meetings that they've been holding in the towns that are affected. And it's usually been Alan Ford, who's their head of, or he's vice president, I think now, of public relations. Jim Hartman, who's the land agent. Mark Hamrick, who is the project manager. He's the construction manager, the engineer. So when I've quoted them, it's been from meetings that they've held in other towns. We have a lot of videos of those meetings on our website, and I refer to them quite a bit, and I've gone to quite a few of them as well. I'm sure they have one heck of a legal team. It's a company that has 11,500 employees across the country, and I'm sure there's a big legal team behind that as well.
And Alan Ford himself is a lawyer, the PR guy, so he's generally careful about what he says.
Yeah.
Although sometimes he seems to slip up and say things that are, he's pretty careful.
Yeah, he tries to be very careful.
I don't believe that has veracity.
Yeah. Well, we found evidence to the contrary of several of their statements, and I try to bring them up whenever I find them. One of the ones that they said in Dalton was that there's no export intentions, and he said it's pure speculation, it's just fantasy. And we presented after they did, so they made their presentation, took Q&A, and then we gave our presentation, and we had all these, contracts from Canada clipped already. So, yeah, people get to judge for themselves, especially when we get to present back to back. Yes.
So I'm from Lancaster, and I'm really up against this pipeline. The FERC process, how optimistic are you that this federal permitting process, there can be a local influence, both on a statewide level and a local level, on something that may just be through the machinery of a federal permitting process?
Yeah, machinery is a good word. FERC has been...
And may I just ask, can everybody hear the questions as they're answered or asked, or should we have them?
Maybe you could repeat
Yeah.
Yeah, the question was how much local influence can there be on the FERC process? Or is it just a large machinery that approves pipelines? And that's actually the reputation that FERC has, is the phrase rubber stamp comes up an awful lot, that they approve most of the projects that come through. It's been really heartening lately to see some of the successes that have started to come through. And it's mostly due to increasing public pressure. At this point, people are getting very tired of pipelines and the degree of drilling that's happening across the country. So there's more people speaking out than ever before. And the Delaware River project, for instance, was a pipeline that was an interstate pipeline project. And the way that it was filed with FERC by the pipeline company was as little pieces. Segmentation, yeah. And basically they have a small environmental review for each one of those segments. And it looks like it has a much lower impact than the overall project does. And FERC went ahead and approved that, and people brought them to court and said that is unlawful segmentation of a project. And it's still going through the court process, but that's never happened before. The Constitution pipeline being turned back for a second application, that's rarely happened before, if at all before, and that was due to public pressure. It was due to people not allowing them to survey. And again, as I said, it was only 23% of the pipeline route that was not surveyed. And FERC said, no, your paperwork is incomplete. Between that and the amount of public pressure that's going on, we really need you to make sure that all your paperwork is in order. Please go back and redo that. So it does have an influence. One of the things that I'm hoping we can start to do is make it so that FERC is not the sole permitting agency. Right now they have to call in the EPA and so on. What was the phrase you used?
Cooperating agencies.
Cooperating agencies. So they help contribute to the review, but they don't have final say. Right now it's down to the 5 commissioners of FERC to approve or disapprove the project. We're hoping that we can convince some of our senators or representatives that are on federal energy committees to make the EPA equal with FERC, so that there's 2 agencies at least that have to sign off on it. It'd be great if there was a consumer agency that would do that, you know. I mean, we're still dealing with federal agencies that tend to cater to industry, but with enough pressure, we're starting to see some progress. Yes, sir.
Browsing in the FERC website, I think I read in one of the FERC cases a statement by FERC that they could not take into consideration the amount of gas that was going to be exported because that was solely under the jurisdiction of the Energy Department. And I'm wondering, is that their position, and what can be done about it?
Yeah, I believe that is their position. I think they said the same thing about greenhouse gas.
The greenhouse gases, they said, was outside of their purview as well. So one thing is to put pressure on the DOE, on the Energy Department. And again, as Bruce mentioned, both of our senators and at least one congressman are on our side here. And I mean, that's not a huge portion of Congress, but there are other states. This is really the start of a nationwide anti-pipeline movement. There's a group in Georgia that's opposing a pipeline, and all up and down the East Coast and West. So I think that we can start to get a bit more pressure in Congress on these agencies. As far as focusing on FERC, Rose mentioned that just today, Congressman McGovern was talking to FERC. We haven't heard the report back, but we got a call. But just to give an idea of how we're working, we got a call last night from one of his staffers saying he's going to meet with the chairwoman. What should we say? So they're looking to the movement for guidance on what to do and how to interact with the state agency. So there's a lot of they're seeing so much of grassroots effort here that they are looking to have us involved. So people really should put the pressure on us. It's not just us, it's the whole state.
Well, just follow up. Has there been an analysis of the statutes under which FERC operates to determine whether or not there's any accuracy in that position, or is it not sustainable if one construes the statute carefully and legally?
Well, we can, if you look at the specifics, there's the Federal Natural Gas Act is the main law in question, and they issue a certificate of public convenience and necessity. So certainly, there's a question of it certainly doesn't seem convenient to us, and who the public is that's in question if you're sending it to Europe. So that is something that, when push comes to shove, we expect that if we have to, there will be an appeal into a court. I mean, there's a thought that, while FERC may still, like the rubber stamp the pipelines, that doesn't mean that a federal court necessarily would, and we may be more likely to win on an appeal if we don't make it through the agency with the result that we want. And we've talked to some lawyers in Washington about whether we would want to go to a court in Washington, or could we, would it be, looking for the best court to get the best result. So that sort of analysis has been done. We've also been talking to a constitutional lawyer, and we're looking at different sorts of approaches because this is somewhat of a novel issue, the idea of stopping a pipeline, not just moving a little bit here and a little bit there. And this is new in the last few years, to just say no. So there's not a lot of case law to go on, but that means there's a lot of opportunity to build on.
And it also means that there aren't a lot of actual statutes that FERC follows. Their guidelines are very broad. So they basically are, as they field questions, they can say, yeah, that's not our purview to do that. And there's very little that actually defines what they can, push off to other agencies, like pushing it to the Department of Energy, or pushing it to EPA, I guess would be climate change, yeah. So, yeah, I mean, it's all kind of new ground that we're exploring together in trying to rein in some of the hold that FERC has. Another act that influenced the natural gas industry was the Energy Bill of 2005, otherwise known as the Halliburton loophole. And that provided a lot of exemptions for the natural gas industry to the Clean Water Act, Clean Air Act, Clean Drinking Water Act, some of the Superfund. It's a little bit different for pipelines than for drilling, but some of that is also in there, and that's mostly due to FERC having tremendous purview over other departments.
I am curious, I believe the Worcester lateral, or excuse me, the Fitchburg lateral is through town right now. I think that's a 14-inch line. But I'm not positive. And I believe it's tapped off somewhere north of here. And part of this project is to hook Fitchburg into the large line going across the top, so that in fact the Fitchburg lateral would then be fed by both north and south.
Yep.
And the Worcester lateral then feeds off that. And I'm curious whether there's any information in terms of what the fail rate or problems or whatever has been on the Fitchburg lateral, because that's been in town for since before 1970 or 71 when we moved to town. And when you hook a 24 or 30 inch or whatever onto the top of an old 14,
Yeah.
and I don't know what the transmission line coming in from the south, what size it is, but there's a tremendous amount of gas that's going to be forced from one way or another way into an old line that now they're going to tap off. And if there's been no particular problem with the old line to date, I suspect there's going to be major problems with it if they tap this Worcester into that.
Yeah, a similar situation actually happened in Sandusfield when they were adding a second pipe to an existing pipe. The blasting that they had to do to put it in actually burst open the first pipe, and they had to evacuate the town. So it's always tricky to tap into older pipes. I don't know the history of the Fitchburg lateral. That would be an excellent thing to look up, whether, what condition it's actually in. Probably the Department of Transportation pipeline material, pipeline hazardous material and safety agency might have some of that data on the existing Fitchburg lateral. And yes, you can see it here. This is the Fitchburg lateral that comes up off of the large transmission lines that are running in the southern part of the state. And they're proposing another lateral here to connect the new Northeast Energy Direct to that. And part of that is so the gas that's coming through here can make it down to Connecticut for those markets. That was on that other slide that we had that showed the yellow arrows going down to Connecticut. We call it Northeast Energy Indirect because they would be bringing it all the way up here to shunt it down to Connecticut. But the Fitchburg line, I believe, is 12 or 14, and it runs at 750 pounds per square inch, not the full 1,500 that the larger transmission line to the north would. And the construction manager, when he spoke in Berlin, said this would be a 12-inch line, which is actually 12 3/4. And that would also run at 750. So it's not running at the highest pressure possible. Well, it's probably the highest pressure for that diameter of pipe, but it's still a high pressure. And they will have pigging facilities, according to him, at the place where it connects to the existing Fitchburg and at the Worcester end. So there are large facilities going, well, fairly large facilities, off-gassing facilities going on at the connection point and at the end as well. So yeah, the health of that pipe, that's a very good question. And I'm sorry I don't have an answer on that right away, but that's definitely something to look up. Yes, sir.
Yes, question on the economic opportunity that Morgan has here is there's two plants, right, in the Northeast, Brayton Point and another coal-fired electric plant. These are EPAs, they have mandated to be shut down. And that's bringing in this need for an alternative energy at the peak time. Have you also examined any of the, what I call the race to sell energy to Massachusetts from the hydroelectric opportunity from, what's that, Northern Gas?
Northern Gas, yeah. Actually, the bill that would have approved the Northern Pass transmission line, electric transmission line as opposed to a gas transmission line, to bring electricity from Hydro-Quebec, that did not pass the legislature in Massachusetts anyway. So the plants that are coming offline have already been not producing at full capacity. So the Department of Energy has been saying, oh, we're going to lose 8,300 megawatts of energy when all these plants close, the coal, the oil, and Vermont Yankee. But most of them have not been producing at that level anyway. And when you look at projects that are already slated to come online or are being considered, like Cape Wind, different solar projects that are going on in the state, plus the continuation of energy efficiency, even Department of Energy says there's only a 700 megawatt shortfall. If we fixed all of the gas leaks, not just the two classes that they've recently approved, that's 400 megawatts savings right there. And we are mandated to put in 1,600 megawatts of solar and 2,000 megawatts of wind. We actually end up with a surplus of about 2,000 megawatts by 2020. This pipeline wouldn't be finished until 2018. So the chances are that there won't be a shortfall. Even if we took their 15%, they say that 15% of all the projects suggested never come online. We did the math for that, and we still came up with a surplus of about 1,200 megawatts. Oh, yeah, there's a large wind power farm in Maine, large wind farm in Maine. And one of the things that is holding that up is they don't have the electric transmission lines to bring it to market. So if that was approved, instead of coming all the way from Canada, they have the wind power right there, and it's just not running because they don't have a way for that energy to get to market. So there are a lot of opportunities out there that aren't really being tapped.
That's it. I have two questions, or two things. Number one, when we get through all this process, we're all going to need a lawyer. That's for sure. And Katie, do you have some sort of coalition? Do you have some sort of plans to help people? You've got to get the right lawyer, you've got to get an energy and environmental type of thing. Are you going to come up with a group of lawyers that might help us out? That's number one. I really want to answer that. The other thing is, if you could refer to the FERC process, because I don't think the people realize we're getting into this pre-filing and what it means. There are handouts over here that show it.
Sure. With regard to lawyers, what we've been doing is working as a group and also coordinating with other groups, some of the big environmental groups in the state, and trying to make sure that we cover all of the bases at FERC and all of the various avenues. So we may end up hiring a lawyer from Washington or one from New York or one from here to represent the entire group at FERC. But if you're talking about towards the end, if things go in such a way that you're getting into eminent domain proceedings, then that's a long time down the road, and we would be looking at individual land use lawyers at the local level, and also needing to evaluate the value of your property. But that's I'll explain the timeline and way out. So why that's down the road. Within the next 2 weeks, Kinder Morgan says that they will be pre-filing at FERC.
Yeah, this slide is actually old. This is, still says October.
Yeah,
It's actually September.
Yeah, they've now said September. And so then the first big place where there's time for public participation officially are these open houses that Kinder Morgan holds, somewhat similar to the select board meetings they've been having that have happened across the state with their presentations, except what we've been told is that they have held, in New York at least, they've held them in big hotels filled with people and
What's that these display words?
yeah, big displays, and they would then individually, one-on-one, go down the aisles and try to convince people about how wonderful their project is. And what they did in New York is trained some people who were comfortable following the Kinder Morgan representatives around to counter everything they said while they walked the aisle. So that's one of the things that we expect to be doing in the coming months, and that will be in November and December when the open houses are. And then the scoping hearings are held by FERC, and that's where the public can comment on what sorts of what should be studied in the environmental impact statement. So it's when we all come up with questions. We don't have to have answers as to what the environmental impact would be, but ask all of the possible questions so it can be as thorough a study as possible. So we plan to be offering trainings across the state with some environmental experts and lawyers on that. And you should bear in mind that, well, this is a federal process. FERC says that they will adhere to some state processes as well. So we would involve Massachusetts experts as well as people who are experts in the FERC process. And so that scoping process then goes on for about 9 months or so, and then the actual application filing would be almost a year from now. And at that point is when you can become an intervener officially and we just did this with the Connecticut expansion, which is in Sandusfield. We went and you could just go online and intervene. It's a very short window of time in which to intervene, which means that you then have the right to appeal and to file briefs and all these other things. But so we will get the word out when that time comes and let people know how to intervene online. And if you don't intervene, you can also file comments at that time. And there will be earlier time, there's the scoping comments and other comments that there are a few different periods where you can comment online at FERC. And then this is their timeline. It will probably take a lot longer. This is sort of their most optimistic timeline. We expect it to be more drawn out than what this says. Yes.
So the Massachusetts Attorney General's Office has a Public Protection Bureau, and they have a Utilities Division, which represents the public interest in a variety of cases, including FERC cases over the years. This seems like a case that they ought to take on behalf of the public. And of course, if this all starts in January of 2015, then Maura Healy is the person who wanted to talk to you. You didn't tell us what her position is on this pipeline and whether she would be willing to put her resources of her office. I used to work in that office years ago, and I will tell you, I worked on the Seabrook case. And we were able to put together a major case at the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. Ultimately, we lost, but 3 years later, that plant was up to about $6 billion in cost and kind of stopped the nuclear industry in its tracks for about a decade. So you need to get that office. The parties that intervened in the Seabrook case on their own, small groups, they weren't very effective. You need the Attorney General's office. So what's the likelihood with Maura?
Maura Healy was the first statewide candidate to come out in opposition to the pipeline. She is the only one I know of who actually took part in the statewide march against the pipeline. She has, I think she would commit resources to fighting this. And also at FERC, the Energy Facility Siting Board is the official, they are the agency that officially, the number one agency representing the Commonwealth, but I think that my understanding is Maura Healy plans to be is actively already involved in this. And just by the way, the lawyer who we are working with locally was a Seabrook lawyer, Tom Lesser. And he was involved in the anti-nuclear movement 40 years ago too. He represented Sam Lovejoy. So he's now quite well connected politically, and so he's been helping us in that way as well.
And public pressure like that does help with agencies as well. With the Sandusfield case, we only had until September 4th to register interveners and comments, because in that pipeline case, they actually wanted to go for expedited review, which meant that they wanted to skip the pre-filing process. They wanted to skip the environmental review process. And we got a campaign going to ask the Department of Energy and Environmental Affairs to register as an intervener. And we got personal emails back from the Secretary of Energy and Environmental Affairs saying that the Energy Siting Board had just registered, the Department of Environmental Protection had just registered. So public pressure on that level helps tremendously. And the reason that we can't do anything right now is because they haven't filed yet, so there's nothing to formally file against. We have been talking with the Attorney General's office back and forth about several of the problems with this, whether it's likely to go to export, does that constitute public necessity, and so on. She was a bit slow to respond at first. She started to respond a little bit. This is Coakley, yeah. And of course, with the election, we're changing hands anyway. But don't ever hesitate. As a matter of fact, make it a point to contact every governmental agency who's supposed to be working for you. That's what they are. We are their employers, and we should have them on our side. Don't ever hesitate to contact them and get them involved.
And I just want to mention one other way that we've gotten involved recently is every gas company in the state has to file a forecast and supply plan with the Department of Public Utilities, and Berkshire Gas just filed one and said that how much they love the idea of this pipeline, if there would be no better route from their perspective. And, right, and they're concerned that if they don't have this pipeline or more pipeline capacity, they would have to have a moratorium on new customers. So we just today intervened in that state agency regulatory proceeding, just suggesting that, pointing out that they have statutory requirements to use energy efficiency and put it on an equal footing with all their other supply options, and pointing out the greenhouse gas analysis that they need to do. So that's one place that we've gotten involved. And the Attorney General's office has gotten involved there too, but we're not sure that they're going to do everything that we want, which is why we intervened.
Yeah, I have a question about property taxes. You mentioned that you would encourage people, if it comes down to that, to go the eminent domain route. I thought I heard you say that if that happens, the property owners are not responsible for property taxes on that piece of property. And I have a part two. I had heard that Kinder Morgan is supposed to pay the town property taxes on that, but it would be on a sort of depreciated scale where they would eventually pay nothing or close to nothing. So,
With respect to eminent domain, if Kinder Morgan takes it by eminent domain, it is their property, which is why you wouldn't have to pay property tax on that swath of land. As if you negotiate with them and give them an easement, then they have rights, but you still own it, which is why you would have to pay the property taxes. I am not sure the answer about the depreciating, about what their property tax value. Do you know about that?
Yeah, I haven't heard about them paying property tax. I've heard them, about them paying a business tax to the town for the gas that goes through the town. And some towns have said, wow, we're bringing in all this money, it's $100,000 or whatever it is, depending on the town. One thing that we've urged them to consider is if there are leaks, what kind of environmental damage is being caused and how much does cleanup cost. If there's an explosion, what would be the cost to their local agency. Somebody brought up a question to their land manager, if there's an explosion that was caused by a third-party interest, who's responsible for fixing that and cleaning that up? And if it's the third party, we're not responsible. So it can quickly escalate if something goes wrong, and that's something that we ask select boards to consider when they hear how much they might be paying to come through town, whether or not they weigh against each other.
Could I follow that? You bring up a good point. Is what liability does the company bear in the event of an explosion? Like say there was an explosion and a whole neighborhood was wiped out. I mean, what is their liability?
They say that it depends on who caused the explosion. So if it's somebody who dug and didn't know the pipeline was there, then it's the responsibility of whoever dug. And there have been a couple of cases with other pipeline companies where they didn't mark where the pipelines were correctly, or they didn't keep up the markings. You know, if somebody took it out, they didn't go over the property regularly and replace those markers. So somebody dug, there was an explosion, and it went through court for years over who was actually responsible because it wasn't properly marked. So it gets complicated the more you get into that, but they will not cover it if they rule that it was somebody else's fault that caused it.
As far as the property taxes are concerned, the Board of Selectmen might do well to consider that there's a negative impact on property values. Because the pipeline, then their revenues are going to be decreased on property taxes.
I'd just like to reiterate it so it can be heard. She brought up the point that town select boards need to consider that if property values drop in the town, the negative impact of that decreasing revenue is another thing for them to consider.
And what ultimately would end up happening, because the town does need to pay its expenses, is everybody else in town's property taxes go up.
To follow that up, though, it's not up to the Board of Selectmen, they'll require cooperation from the Board of Assessors at 2 or 3 levels, and that's much harder to get.
Depends on the town.
It wasn't a question, it was a follow-up. They do depreciate the land values. So the amount of tax they pay does depreciate. They depreciate the asset of the pipeline, so they knock down what they pay every year. And as an interesting part to that, as we bring up the arguments, as you guys said too, about repairing existing lines, the existing line through Bolton, they pay next to nothing now in tax on it. So they really don't want to touch it. If they were to dig that up and fix it, then they reset the asset. Now they have to start paying tax on it again, which is good for the town. That it's already here, but now that they've run it down to where their tax liability is next to nothing, they have no incentive to fix that line or repair that line, which would increase their capacity. I think it was at 10% they lose.
10 to 30.
Yeah, approximately. But it's a really good point with tax values. They do bring that up, but they do depreciate it every year, and it depreciates real quick down to nothing.
That's really interesting to know too, that it does depreciate, and they're paying next to nothing on the old lines, because several people have brought up the question in different meetings. Why build, if there's already pipelines in some of these areas, why build another line? Why not just enlarge the ones and improve the ones that are there? And that probably answers the bulk of it. Their tax liability goes up on that. Wow.
I'm curious about one thing. I'm opposed to the Northeast and more particularly the Worcester lateral. But I'm curious, you skipped over fairly quickly the same point that Kenneth Morgan skipped over before, and that is, explain to me why, and you mentioned particularly 495 and 290, and it's hard to go about across the right-of-way. For my way of thinking, and anybody that in the room that's driven around, the most logical thing is to come off the Northeast and go down 190. It goes straight into Worcester, but you suggest that it's hard to do, but is that because the government's got more power and deeper pockets and they can fight it better than the individual landowner? Or what is the real problem with going over public right-of-ways for highways?
We're guessing that that's part of the problem, that it's much harder for them to negotiate with state agencies, but it's also a matter of safety. If transportation and gas do not go along very well, there's a lot of vibration, there's a lot of spark. If there's a leak, it can spark off a gas explosion really easily. And there's also only so many feet of space along the roadway, so they would need to expand. It would have to be a 50-foot minimum, I would think, easement to stay 25 feet away from traffic, and then another 25 feet off the side. So they're dealing with a lot of the same problems, negotiating for easements with all those property owners, plus all of the hazards that come from building along the roadway, dealing with state agencies, and having to build to a higher impact standard.
Unless somebody grossly disagrees with me, though, the center median of 190 is more than 50 feet wide.
And the same argument's been made about the turnpike too for I-90, and that's a direct west to east corridor. Of course, we're of the opinion that the gas isn't even needed when you actually do the study. So if it comes down to there will be a pipeline and we need to talk about rerouting, I-90 is sort of the most logical direct east to west, or west to east.
Well, I mean, one part of the answer for Kinder Morgan is that it would cost a lot more to have to build to the higher standards and to deal with the DOT regulations.
Actually, they were asked about road crossings for Route 2, and they would need to, when they cross a major highway like that, cross under a highway like that, it's not just a matter of the highest grade of pipe, which costs more, it's also dampening mechanisms. They have a particular type of concrete that allows for flex that they need to encase it in. It's a whole new level of construction, so it does cost them a lot more to explore those. They prefer the green fields.
Yeah, I just have a comment. It seems to me that's an open admission that this is less safe than they all want to lead us to believe it is. And I mean, that's a point we should really focus on because they don't want to spend the money to do it right.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's been brought up with them in forums in Greenfield. They met with the Franklin County Franklin?
Council.
Franklin Regional Council of Governments, we know it as FERCOG, but it's a large governmental body for the whole Franklin County area. And they asked them, is this one of the reasons you wanted to build? And eventually they got around to, well, yeah. And we can do class 1 pipe, and it's a lot easier. Yes, sir.
Yeah, you mentioned the state agencies that you've been successful in getting involved, the Energy Facility Siting Board, the Department of Environmental Protection. These are, of course, state agencies that are ultimately under the governor. And I'm glad you got Maura Healy, and it sounds like Martha Coakley on your side. But what about Charlie Baker? You know, this is starting to shape up to be a very, very close race. Has he expressed an opinion on it? Because if he hasn't, it seems like there ought to be a strategy you could pursue here to get him to stake out a position. If he's against it, it kind of helps the prospects of Martha Coakley. If he's for it, great, you've got your bases covered.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And I was just after the primaries, I was saying, okay, what's the new game plan? And we did put out, we sent around a questionnaire, and I did not hear back from Charlie Baker about a position. I think, particularly at the time, he didn't have much competition. So now there may be more of a reason to have to come out with a position. But we do intend to follow up. Definitely, because we want to have them, whoever it is, to be on our side and know our concerns. And also, there's the Department of Energy Resources who is doing this follow-up study. It's this other state agency, and they have committed to. They're now looking for a consultant, and we were involved in helping on the scope of the study, so we had a lot of input into what questions they were asking, and they really were very responsive, and they plan to have the study completed by the beginning of December, so that's still within the same administration, so that they can hand the results over to whoever the next governor is. And we've been in communication with the Senate President, because he's going to, the incoming Senate President, because he's going to be around. So we want to make sure he helps see whatever legislation that might be needed to follow up on the results of that study through.
And this falls under my usual preaching is to get involved and inform people and inform your elected officials and potential elected officials too. Inform all of the candidates about the pipeline. Tell them your concerns. If you don't like the answer you're hearing, tell them why you're concerned about it. Write to them, call them until you start to get some sort of answer one way or another. Then you know who you're dealing with before election time. And people power really counts. Every one of us contacting them makes an impact. That's part of how we got in to see the governor, part of how we got to talk to Department of Energy and Environmental Affairs twice now, and how we got to work with the Energy Department is we came with a petition with 10,000 plus signatures on it saying we don't want new pipelines. We want energy efficiency and clean energy instead. And we came with multiple towns that had resolutions like the ones that have been signed around here. And that is part of why we're getting the new study and why the tariff has been put on hold and why we're getting a response. So again, do not hesitate, not only to contact the people who are already in place, but contact anyone who might be elected and let them know what your concerns are.